Hi, I'm Margaret Wurtenberg, and this is the League of Women Voters of Weston's debate for the 135th District. We have traditionally done basically this debate and focused on it because it happens to be, we're the kind of a town that has, it's cut down the middle on the Senate, but we have, all of us share the state representatives, so we try to focus on that, and we have for years. And rather than, I think we've covered most of the other things, but I want you to know that we have, although we have no fancy sound recordings, we do have sound recorders up here, and we will be having this online, and you'll be able to hear it even better online, probably before the middle of the week, to watch it at your leisure over and over and over and over. It's wonderful. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be able to open this meeting and turn the real business stuff and the directions of what's going to happen. And by the way, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah. Wouldn't have been a debate without both of you. Okay, here we go. We have Jean Rabineau, the most magnificent moderator, in my opinion, for the state of Connecticut's league.
Thank you for that undeserved compliment.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. As Margaret says, town has been doing this for years. Many of you know the rules. The debate as a whole will take approximately 1.5 hours. Each candidate is going to be given 2 minutes to answer each question, with a possibility of a 1-minute rebuttal or extension of remarks. They will get a warning sign from the timers, and timers, please hold the signs momentarily. That is the warning, and there should be a stop as well.
Yes, we've got to stop.
All right. Yes. I will say this. If the candidate is in the middle of a word when the stop sign is raised, I will let them complete the word. All right. I used to say I would let them complete the thought. I've discovered that that was a mistake. There will not be any opening statements by the candidates. Each candidate, I believe, will be given a 2-minute closing statement towards the end of the morning, or afternoon, actually. And that being said, the candidates tossed for the order in which questions would be given, and the first question goes to Mr. Dunsby first. It is one of several that were asked about the budget, and it is, do you have a plan to eliminate, not just reduce, our pension deficit? If so, what is it? If not, why not?
So the Connecticut, I guess the budget deficit and the pensions in general. I mean, so as people know, there are two main pension plans. There's the teachers and the state employees. Both are underfunded. In regard to reducing the pension deficit with the state employees, I mean, the thing we need to do is move all new employees who become employees of the state should be put on a 401k type retirement program rather than a defined benefit plan, which the state employees get now. The standard for the private sector has gone to 401ks long time ago. It's a matter of equity, too, of taxpayers. I mean, the state employees, the amount they've been paying might be 0 to 2%. Historically, it's gone up a little bit recently, but still very low. It's still much less than anyone in the private sector would get. So the main thing we need to do is move new employees to a 401k type pension plan. And that will at least put us on the path of reducing the deficit. It's also important to do because I think people now well realize that politicians or public servants who are elected on a 2-year budget, 2-year cycle, have just had fundamental difficulty adequately funding the pension plan. There's no reason we like to expect our public officials will suddenly get religion and be more responsible, but it hasn't happened in the past. So if we put people on a 401k type retirement program, or people put in some money, the state matches a portion of it, that basically takes the state out of the pension plan, and that would be a much more responsible thing to do. And there are benefits for the employees as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hughes.
Well, I believe that we have a good plan with, that we will work with our comptroller, our treasurer, our governor, and our legislature. It is a long-term fiscally responsible plan that we need to address the unfunded pension liabilities, but those go back decades. And the agreement made in the Rowland administration in '91 and then again in '97 led to a balloon mortgage type of debt, which is now coming due. And I believe we make good on our obligations to our public servants. I believe that we honor our commitments in this state, and our new employees are getting a blend of defined contribution and defined benefit plan. I believe we all deserve a stable and secure retirement, and that is what they signed on for when they took a lower wage in the public sector. So I think that we all deserve that, and we all ought to work towards that goal for everybody, not just our public officials.
All right, Mr. Dunsby, any rebuttal or extension?
Sure. So, Ann is correct that when Governor Rowland was in office, we put in locked in the benefits for 20 years. By the way, the state of Connecticut, I think, is one of 4 states that does benefits through collective bargaining. All the others do it by statute. The problem is we should have learned from that. Instead of that, Governor Malloy locked it in for an additional 10 years, which just takes the flexibility away. We should be on much shorter term, short contracts. I mean, what I would propose is doing this for new employees. I mean, the people who are there now, certainly people who are getting pensions, unlikely we would do anything there. But I think it's in everyone's interest to move to the 401k type program for the future. If there's advantages for the employees too, I mean, it's mobile, they can take it with them if they choose not to stay with the state, and also it's more stable. Every year now we're coming back. I mean, everyone knows this is happening. The unions know, the legislature know, the employees know. Everyone knows we're going to go to this type of plan in the future. Are we getting 1 minute rebuttal or?
1 minute rebuttal.
Okay, because that says 1 minute. Okay. So, I mean, everyone knows it's going to happen. I mean, I was at a forum where a longtime Democratic senator got up.
Oh, I'm afraid that is it.
It went from 1 minute to stop pretty quick. All right, I'll stop there. I'll stop there.
Okay. Sorry, anything further, Ms. Hughes, on pensions?
You know, how many people lost much of their retirement savings in their 401k value in the last crash? A lot of us did. It was a good plan if the stock market was always going up. But our teachers and our state workers commit to public service, and they don't want to know every 2 years that could change. So we do owe a stable contract, and I think that the private sector went to 401k because it was better for the corporations. I don't know that it's better for all the workers like you and I, who lost a lot of our retirement savings in the crash. I think it's better for us to be fiscally responsible about our commitments and to address a long-term plan with very carefully with the treasurer, the comptroller, and the governor.
Okay. The next question is also an economic question. It goes to Ms. Hughes first. We've got about 10 of it. One of them described the state budget as an ocean of red ink, but the question I'm going to ask is, we are facing a $4.2 billion deficit in the next 2 years. How would you address fixing that, and would tax raises be included?
Well, I don't know that we're going to fix it in the next 2 years, but I think we can address it right away. I think we are looking at a way to fund our unfunded pension liabilities, and it goes out till 2027, and it's a steep investment. But I think that we need to look at some other ways of diversifying and raising revenue, some other ways of being creative about consolidating some of our administrative expenses. The state has already shrunk its budget by $130 million over the past 5 years. That means that some crucial services have been cut back, especially in the northwest corner of Connecticut, where they don't have police departments and they rely on state troopers and things like that. I think that we could really be served by expanding our regional tax base. Any new monies that come in through companies or leasing or renting of state properties to be put into a pool to benefit this regional services, emergency services, and road and transportation repair and that kind of thing, so that it's not just tied to the zip code that it's coming into.
Okay, Mr. Dunsby.
So no, I would not favor any new taxes. I mean, I wouldn't favor them anyway, but if you look at our history, they have not worked. We had a massive tax increase in 2011, we had a very big tax increase in 2015, and still we're facing massive budget deficits. We only got through this year, the year we're in now, because of some federal law passed 10 years ago, which meant some investment companies had to bring money back on shore. Otherwise, this year would have been a very, very bad year. We managed to push that off 1 year, but that's it. We're facing $2 billion deficits every year out, and our entire budget's like $20 billion. So these are 10% budget deficits right there. So here are some of the things that we should be doing. So one I mentioned, the state should get out of the pension business. New employees should go on a 401k type program. As I said, it would be cheaper for the state. It's not necessarily that much worse for the employees, who would have more stability and certainty in their retirement. We should be combining some state departments. I mean, whether you like it or not, our government has grown over the past 20 years. The population hasn't grown very much. There's lots of different ways to do it. I mean, we have banking and insurance, separate banking, separate insurance, possibly we can combine that. We have several military departments that could possibly be combined. The intent would be to provide the same level of service, but reduce some of the management. Department of Early Childhood Development could possibly be combined with education. They do a lot of the same things. We should be borrowing less. I mean, when this governor took office, we borrowed about $1 billion a year. Now we're borrowing about $2 billion a year. We passed a cap at $1.9 billion, which we treated as a victory, which is better than nothing, but it's still way, way too much. We could look at utilizing some potentially underutilized assets, and one idea is put them in the pension fund, which I think Mike Gimber is leading a commission on that. Mike is here. I tried to get on the commission, but Themis gave the appointment to someone else. And over time, make use of a greater use of the not-for-profit sector. I mean, we basically have parallel, we parallel group homes both done at state level and through the not-for-profit. The not-for-profit could do just as well. Thanks. Thanks for your time.
Okay, any extension or rebuttal?
Yeah, I think we have to grow our economy for the modern economy, and there are three stools to that three-legged stool, and one of them is attracting our young workforce and attracting our graduates back to Connecticut with some kind of student loan relief and some kind of affordable, at least 2-year apprenticeship trade school or community college. Another stool to that growing in the economy is affordable healthcare access. And the third stool leg, you're going to have to ask me another question about.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Dunsby? No. All right. Next question goes to Mr. Dunsby first, and it is not about money per se. It is, what should the legislature do to increase protection against fracking waste entering the state? Is the present position in the statute strong enough?
So I serve on the Environment Committee, and in the first year and the second year, a bill banning bringing fracking waste came before the Environment Committee. I voted in favor of that bill twice. It came in front of the House, I think the first year, and I voted in favor of it then. It did not get taken up by the Senate. Frankly, I'm not quite sure why. It seemed like a pretty easy one. But if that were to come up again, I would certainly vote for it. We have right now a moratorium in place, and I'm not sure exactly the details, how much longer that's for. There's a moratorium in place. I mean, as a practical matter, we do have time to think about this because there is no fracking waste coming into Connecticut and no one's proposed doing so. But I would support it at the state level. I mean, there is a movement, and lots of towns have implemented their own fracking wastes ban. And that may be the way we end up going. It'd be much, much better to do it at the state level, and I would support that. If that didn't happen after time, I might support it at the local level. But if we can do it at the state level with one consistent set of regulations for everyone, that is the better approach. So I would support the fracking waste ban, and I have supported it.
Okay, Ms. Hughes?
Yes, I would definitely support the fracking waste ban and more. If we can be the leader, that Connecticut can be a leader as a coastal state, at a state that is really impacted by climate change, rapid climate change, we need to be leading the way and transferring to renewable energy, to resourcing renewable and sustainable energy interdependency. And I think we can do that, and we can do that by saying this is not going to be a short-term, a short-term gift to our economy is to transport or dump fracking waste. We already have some of the highest polluter coal-fired power plant in Bridgeport, which is contributing to asthma rates that are unacceptable to our children in this state, and we need to shut it down and lead in terms of renewable energy.
All right, anything further, Mr. Dunsby? Anything further? Ms. Hughes, anything further?
Nope.
Okay, next question to Ms. Hughes first.
Sure.
What are your positions on the two proposed amendments to the Connecticut Constitution that are going to be on the ballot?
I'm in favor of both of them. I'm in favor of any sale of public lands or distribution of our state lands needs to be carefully vetted and go through a 2/3 majority before we dispose of them. It really belongs to we the people. And we need to have an accountable, transparent government that communicates with its public about what it's doing with its public assets and resources. And instead of, letting them be sold to out-of-state quasi-public entities that are for-profit, we need to preserve our beautiful natural resources, our water, and our land. So that is one of the referendum items, and the other is the transportation lockbox. And we definitely need a transportation lockbox for our transportation revenue to be used solely for transportation infrastructure revitalization. That again, it addresses that transparent accountability. The lockbox has been raided, the transportation funds have been raided, and we desperately need to restore that fund to invest in modernizing our transportation infrastructure to get this economy growing.
Okay, Mr. Dunsby.
So there's two constitutional questions on the ballot, both of which I support and both of which I voted for in the legislature. The first is to basically anytime the state wants to sell or transfer any land, it has to go through a public hearing process. And then in certain cases, if it's controlled by the Department of Agriculture or if it's controlled by the DEEP, it has to have a two-thirds vote. And the issue had been that in some cases, as you get toward the end of the legislative session, lots and lots of stuff gets crammed into bills. It's hard for even legislators to know what all the details are. And there was some sense that some land was being disposed of without having a public hearing. And so the primary purpose of that is so that the public is aware and has a chance to testify in public on land transfers. I would support that. The next one is the transportation lockbox. So my view there is it's better than nothing. It really wasn't the kind of lockbox that we needed, but I'll support it because it's better than nothing. So what it basically says is that any money that goes into there will exist this lockbox, and any money that goes into it can only be removed for transportation purposes. I think a lot of people know that in the past the state has swept money from the lockbox to cover general expenses, and there's a general sense that that's not the right way to do things. What a lot of people don't know is that in some cases, money targeted for transportation never went into the transportation fund to begin with. And this amendment does not address that. So conceivably, we could put up tolls, for instance, and the legislature could say, well, you know what, we're just not going to put that money into the lockbox. So if it's spent before it goes into the lockbox, it's not protected. The other problem with the lockbox language is that transportation expenses is not defined. And I'm getting the sign there, so I'll stop. It's not that I've lost my train of thought.
No, but there will be another chance to, is there any rebuttal, Ms. Hughes, that you would like to make, or any extension?
I support the amendment, and I think we can improve it, and going forward, if there were a proposal for smart tolls, that it absolutely has to go towards transportation infrastructure.
All right, Mr. Dunsby, if you want to...
Yeah, and then so I just say, again, the problem with the lockbox list that I'll support because it's better than nothing is that no matter what we say, all the constitutional amendment is going to say about taking money out of the lockbox. It's not going to say anything about what has to go in. It was proposed that we change the language to make that change, to make it tighter, but that, that did not prevail. So we were left with this looser language. And then the other issue is, as I was just starting to say before I was interrupted by the stop sign, is that the transportation is not defined. What transportation expenditures are is not defined, so that's potentially a flaw. So potentially, I mean, lots of state employees get mileage reimbursement. That's transportation. I guess someone could say we could use money from the transportation lockbox to pay for mileage reimbursement. It is transportation. So it's a flawed amendment. We could have done better, but it's what we have, and I will support it.
All right. The next question is going to go to Mr. Dunsby first, and it's got a preface. The towns in the 135th District no longer have the Aspetuck News as a paper of record anymore, and this week Westonites found out that the Weston Forum, also a paper of record, is being closed down. What can the legislature do to get information to the public?
Well, one thing that the legislature should enable towns to do is to post legal notices on the town website and have that fulfill the statutory requirement. One of the problems that we have now, municipalities do, is that there's a requirement that legal notices be posted in a paper which have general circulation in the town, which makes sense. I mean, it made sense probably 50 years ago, but today it does not. And as we know, the print media business is not doing well. These papers closed, Aspetuck News, which is actually the papers for the three towns. I know in Easton's case, we are now going to have to publish legal notices probably in the Connecticut Post, which so overnight our legal posting budget is going to double. So one of the things the state legislature should do is open it up so the towns can post legal notices on the website, which by the way is free, which you can access from anywhere in the world. And which, by the way, is much easier for people to get to. And that would be one thing. Hopefully, I think the prognosis for the print media business is probably not good. I mean, with the internet and Facebook and Google ads and so forth, that seems to be the way that we're going. But hopefully community groups will pick up the slack and create community websites and get information out there. It's difficult for a town government to promote too much community stuff through a website, because then you get to issues, whether it's a church picnic or a political event or something like that. It's difficult for a town-controlled website or outlet to broach into those areas. So hopefully the community will pick up the slack.
Okay, Ms. Hughes.
Well, we can start with a new era of representation. We can start with a new era of your representative communicating with you where you're at. How do you want to be communicated with? By text, by social media, on the phone. I put my cell phone number on every walk card and I come to your door. And that's not going to stop on November 6th. We are starting a new era of accountability in government in Connecticut on all levels, and transparency and good communication. And I pledge to be a better communicator with the public starting Now, starting with you showing up right here and communicating at this forum. And I really applaud you all for showing up and staying engaged, because that's what this campaign is about, is keeping public engagement on all levels. It's not enough to dial it in once a year on November 6th on voting day. We've got to stay engaged. And that's what I aim to do with all of you, no matter who you are and what your party affiliation or what your age is or what your socioeconomic background. I aim to represent all of you and stay in good communication with you.
Hold it. All right. Mr. Dunsby, do you want to say anything further on that?
Sure, I mean, better than what? But, getting to the area of communication, kind of expanding a little bit. I mean, as a state representative, we have multiple town halls. I make sure we regularly have town halls in all the towns, which are advertised so people can show up. So I wish they were better attended, but we regularly schedule them, we regularly advertise them. We have email lists, so people who want to get updates from me, the state representative, can regularly get that. We have a Facebook page. I'm at events all throughout the time, as most state representatives are. So I really do, and I think most state representatives do what they can to get out and communicate with the public, and that's a big part of the job. And if I'm reelected, that's certainly going to continue.
Okay, Ms. Hughes, anything further?
We can't afford the status quo. That's why I'm running.
All right. Next question goes to Ms. Hughes first. What do you think of Governor Malloy's prison reforms? Would you support them going forward?
I would. I think that we're finally getting into the modern age of reducing recidivism and reducing our prison injustice, our prison of incarcerating people for low-level offenses, and incarcerating people that are caught up in the opioid epidemic and in the drug epidemic and nonviolent crimes, and we need to actually get back to rehabilitation and restoration to the community. And that, I think Governor Malloy, it took some very effective first steps. We really need to look at how we manage juvenile offenders and what the appropriate setting for that is, and we can be a leader in not outsizing this to corporate prison industry. That is not the way to grow our economy.
Okay, Mr. Dunsby on prison?
So some of the reforms I supported were bail reform, which was 2 years ago, which was basically saying there are lots of people who were being arrested for offenses for which they were convicted, probably would not do any jail time, but if they couldn't make bail, then they actually did go to jail. So that was basically eliminated. I supported that. I think that was 2 years ago. Generally speaking, we've decriminalized marijuana. So if you have caught with a small amount of marijuana, it's treated as a very minor infraction, which basically means like a traffic ticket. That we didn't vote on, but I do support that policy, which goes, I think, to the question. We have eliminated the state has lots and lots of requirements for licenses, which is another subject, but among those are sometimes prohibitions if you have a criminal record, and there's been a movement to eliminate some of those, which I've supported. I forget the exact one it was, but I've supported. And to the issue of prisons, I mean, certainly the national trend is for crime is going down and prison populations are going down. And I think that's going to continue. One thing I'll point out, though, is we've actually, because of the CBAC deal, which had a no layoff provision for several years, we've actually made it difficult to close down prisons in Connecticut for several years, because if we were to do so, the people who work there could not be laid off. So I certainly support a lot of these common sense practices in the criminal justice system. And it's my hope that in time we could have a more flexible government and we'll be able to close some of the prisons that we don't need as well.
Okay, anything further, Ms. Hughes?
Yeah, I support the ending cash bail. I support ending solitary confinement, prolonging and yes, we have reduced marijuana use as a low-level offender, but we have not really addressed the people that have been incarcerated as a result of, being charged and convicted of that. And I think we owe better. Prison to community pipeline restoration. That we owe better job training opportunities and supports for people to return to the community and be productive tax-paying citizens. And it's really hard right now with the employer thing that have you ever been convicted and in the job application. I certainly support voluntary disclosures and very thorough background checks once somebody is offered a job, but I think we can do better.
All right, anything further, Mr. Dunsby?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the issues is of getting the prison, people who've been in prison back into society is that we're fundamentally of two minds. I mean, if you ask the people generally, do you think people who served time in prison should be given a second chance? Everyone says yes to that. But then if you ask the question is, well, do you want someone who's been in prison for a good reason, say working with young children or in the school system or something like that? People say no to that almost universally. And that's really kind of where the conflict comes. I'm certainly in favor of doing what we can to giving people a second chance and people who've served time for a serious crime to get back into society and lead productive lives.
All right, that does it for that question. The next question goes to Mr. Dunsby first, and we're getting back to economics. What should the legislature do to create more jobs in Connecticut?
So that's the fundamental problem. I mean, we're one of the very few states that has not recovered all of the jobs lost during the recession of 2008. And as a matter of fact, it's really actually worse than that. The state of Connecticut basically has not grown in 15 years. Actually, it's not quite that bad. But if you look today, the size of the Connecticut economy today is the size that it was in 2004. So all those years of no economic growth, which should really shock and appall all of us. So what can the legislature do? I mean, the first thing we need to do is we need to balance the budget without raising taxes, or without threatening to raise taxes, because we're at the point now where even threatening to raise taxes, it gets noticed and drive people away. We've raised taxes too many times. It's no coincidence that the recession ended in 2008. Since 2008, the Connecticut economy has continued to shrink while the rest of the country is booming. What did we do? In 2011, we raised taxes. In 2015, we raised taxes. Those are the policy decisions which led to continued decline. So what we need to do is we need to balance the budget without raising taxes, which in and of itself is going to be a big effort. I'm not going to try to mislead you there. It's going to be a big effort to balance the budget. But after that, we do need to look at reducing taxes. And the tax that we should be looking at is the income tax. Can we eliminate it or not? I'm not saying we can, but I won't say we can't either, certainly no time soon. But the income tax is a tax on work, and when you tax something, you get less of it. And as I said, it should be no surprise that after 2008, other states had financial trouble. They took different paths. We chose to raise taxes. People work less. We had economic contraction. We used to call the state to the north, Massachusetts, Taxachusetts. Their top marginal tax rate is 5.1%. I think they actually decreased it slightly. Our top marginal tax rate is 7%, 6.99%. So maybe we can at least make that a target to get down to the Massachusetts level.
Okay, I think we're at time on that. All right, same question, Ms. Hughes?
We need to invest in the modern economy. The modern economy is a lot more freelance-based, contract-based, talent-based. It's no longer the economy of the 50s, 60s, 70s, long-term corporate, jobs that come with all the benefits. So it's absolutely critical that we figure out a way to provide our 3.7 million people in Connecticut with the option of an affordable, accessible health care. We already have a good option in our architecture. The exchange, Access Health Connecticut, is actually a really good exchange. It's what the Affordable Care Act, healthcare.gov exchange is based on. We need employees and the workforce not to fear medical bankruptcy to just be and work in the state. We need to pass earned family medical leave so that we can care for a sick child or an aging parent without losing wages and losing our job. We need to modernize our transportation infrastructure, and we need to find some kind of student loan relief to strengthen our public education and our graduates to attract them back to Connecticut and work in Connecticut. And I do believe we need to pass the minimum wage to $15 an hour over a few steps, a few years. It always shows that it stimulates the local economy, and the people that I'm talking to on the doors are willing to pay a few pennies more for their French fries if they know the worker behind the counter is getting at least a decent wage.
All right, anything further, Mr. Dunsby?
Well, I mean, the problem with a lot of things I'm proposing is they cost money, and they require raising taxes. And we've raised taxes, and what's the result? We've shrunk, businesses left, and people have left. I anticipate, just based on, informed by recent history, if we raise taxes again, that's the result that we will see. So I think we should be very cautious about that, and I would not support it. I think people and businesses are very, very capable of organizing their own lives, making their own economic decisions. What they're looking for is a state that provides them the circumstances and an environment which they can thrive in, not a state that overregulates and overtaxes. And I know we don't think we do that, but it appears to be the case that the people who are making those economic decisions do think that, because they're not coming here.
All right, anything further?
The economic decisions of the businesses often need a little incentive and a little prompting. And what I have been seeing is that what people at the doors tell me is that they are not okay with big bonuses going to the CEOs that are making 300% or more than their entry-level wage earners. And it's not okay with me either. I think that we need to insist on Connecticut can be a place with livable wage, and because our cost of living is so astronomical, and we can do that without raising taxes. I know we can.
All right. The next question is going to go to Ms. Hughes first. And again, we've had a couple of people ask this. How would you describe what sustainable development means, and what can the legislature, or should the legislature, do to encourage it?
So when we think about sustainable development, we think about low carbon footprint. We think about livable communities, which are more walkable or more accessible through public transportation. We know a lot of your young adult children aren't coming back here. Where are they going? They're going to Brooklyn. They're going to Portland. They're going to places that have livable communities, that they don't need a car, that they're much more, low carbon footprint. And that's the kind of development. If we want to attract young people and young workforce and graduates that we've invested our public education in, then we need to start doing some smart development of what that looks like. We have some great downtown in Stamford and in Westport, and even in Black Rock, a section of Bridgeport and New Haven. We can build on those, make little better walkable, livable zones. And even if we're thinking about them in our communities, what does a little cluster look like? We have built this post-World War II in big houses on big tracts of land, and it's very automobile dependent, and that is not the economy and the workforce of the future. That's not what they want, automobile dependent neighborhoods. So it doesn't have to be in Weston, Easton, and Reading, but if we want our young people close by, it's got to be on a train line, it's got to be on a bus line, it's got to be easy access, and it's got to be universal design where you can have strollers or also accessibility aging in place. It could be universal, not just for people with mobility issues, but people with young children.
All right, Mr. Dunsby?
So sustainable development means that after the development, the environment is in about just as good shape as it was prior to the development. And that is what we should be striving for. I mean, I got my start in public service as an alternate member of the Eastern Conservation Commission, which does inland wetland permitting. I was on that for about 7 years, and that in some sense was, you know, the local vanguard of sustainable development, making sure that if someone's building a house or an extension or some type of project, that they're being forced to do that in the most environmentally friendly way. In that case, it was wetlands protection, and that's what we have to strive for. I spent a lot of my public service about watershed protection, and I'll continue to do so if given the opportunity. I mean, our towns have basically Easton, Reading, and Weston, which are similar in a lot of ways. They made the decision that they don't want to have cluster housing, that they don't want high-density development, and I think they should be allowed to continue to do that. As a matter of fact, I think there's a lot of benefits, for instance, to the watershed and the water quality, which goes into the reservoirs. Both Easton and Reading are about 90% watershed. Weston is a little bit west. Watershed meaning the water that hits the ground from rain ends up in the reservoirs and is drunk by someone in Fairfield County. The fact that we made kind of a dispersed and spread out community has contributed to that, and the people in these towns seem to like that, and I think they should be able to do that. I would actually go somewhat further and say that the state is a kind of a Jekyll and Hyde approach to water protection, which is not helpful to our communities, because on one side they have the Department of Health and other agencies which basically say you have to do everything you can to protect the public water supply watershed, but on the other side they have basically kind of broad affordable housing statutes which basically prevent towns from doing that very thing. And I got the stop sign.
Okay. Any extension or rebuttal, Ms. Hughes?
I helped found the Northeast Environmental Justice Center at Silver Lake Conference Center to model and teach a new generation of environmental stewardship, planet care. Climate change is real. It's happening faster than we feared. And we know that we have an urgency to change the way we develop fast. And so we built we are restoring and repurposing buildings with incredibly lower net neutral use of energy, with the use of solar and with the use of a really, really thick insulation building envelope. And every little bit that we can contribute to really mitigating the damage of climate change is worth doing. And I think that's what young people want too, is a way to live sustainably in our planet and to preserve our wetlands, preserve our water resources, and preserve our oceans.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Dunsby? All right. All right. I am going to do another thing on the environment. It is going to go to Mr. Dunsby first. What are Connecticut's two most important current environmental issues, and how should the legislature address these?
So I would say that the two most important are the transition to renewable energy, and the state has recently upped its goals for that. And the second, I would say, and perhaps I'm somewhat informed by my past and the district I'm in, is water quality protection. You know, I'll start with the second, water quality protection, and I would say there, I think the state has actually done a pretty good job with that, and we have a new water plan coming out, which it doesn't say too much, but I generally support it, and at least it's an affirmation of the importance of our water. I do think what the state could do better, and this is something which haunts our towns, is to be a little clear about what type of development is allowed in with a public water supply watershed. As I was saying before, the state basically has of two minds. It basically says, you communities, you need to protect that. And then they also say, but a separate part of the state will say, but if someone wants to do high-density housing there, you have to let them. In my view, protection of the watershed should be the prevailing interest there. And the second thing I think we should do is, as I said, is move toward, continue the transition to renewables. In Connecticut, we don't seem to be a very, very good state for wind. We just don't seem to have the wind, and I think Long Island being where it is kind of limits what we can do along the coastline, which some other states do. So for us, it's going to be solar, and I certainly encourage incremental additions to the solar portfolio in the town of Easton. I'm proud to say I've been involved with a big solar project behind the school, and we're about to double that size. And by the way, solar projects are very hard to do. It's very easy for a legislator to go vote to encourage solar. It's actually an entirely different thing to actually build a solar project. But in Easton we've done that.
Okay, Ms. Hughes, same question.
I think we have to pay attention to the privatization of our water and the corporatization of our water resources. And yes, Connecticut could be a green technology corridor. We could have renewable, because our grid and our use, we can be really looking at how do we create a renewable energy system into our grid. And I think that's a community-wide public initiative that we're ready to take on. We could be a health research and development corridor in Connecticut. We could be an advanced technology, an advanced manufacturing corridor. We have a beautiful state. We have a beautiful district that we live in, and we have a beautiful opportunity to be leaders in these areas. And we have to decide as a public that we're ready to invest in that. And I believe, knocking on all of your doors, that we are.
Anything further, Mr. Dunsby?
Yes. So, and just two more things I would add. So we need to add as a caveat that we all want to transition to as much renewable as we can. It's not going to happen overnight because it's not possible. But we do need to be cognizant of the expense on people. Connecticut has the third highest utility costs in the country. We have the first highest utility costs on the continental United States. And we just have to keep that in mind. We have to keep that in mind and make sure any changes that we do generate expenses. Hopefully will generate decreases in cost, but in that it costs more. We need to be cognizant of the burden we're placing on people. And then it wasn't a question, but the third thing I would like to see is policies to increase the uptake of electric vehicles. I mean, I've driven a Chevy Volt for many years now. It's great. That's certainly the direction we want to be going. In my view, having been an electrical vehicle driver for all these years now, the primary problem is the lack of charging stations. And I don't have the solution, but somehow we have to move in the direction of having more charging stations more available, because that's the limiting factor. Somehow I think it'll be involved the gas stations and having them do it. Okay.
Okay, anything further, Ms. Hughes?
I believe in the public will. I believe in we the people, and if we decide that we are determined to be leaders in this investment, we can find ways to do that. And I feel like we're at an urgency, and we're a smart state. We are a coastal state. We will be deeply impacted, and already are, by extreme storms and extreme weather events. So it's time to prepare for that now.
Okay, next question is going to go to Ms. Hughes first.
Oh, goody.
Just what you wanted. All right. I'm not sure when you hear the question. In which areas can or should we regionalize? And what can the legislature do to encourage this?
I would love to see a pool of, that any new businesses or leasing of land or renting of public land, any new revenues that go into regional services around the region, not just in the zip code, but that, I believe, especially for Easton, Weston, and Reading, could really relieve the three towns of solely funding their whole array of services, of emergency services, of, well, schools. We already actually regionalized one of the high schools. But education, public education, emergency services, police, fire. If there, for instance, in Easton, there's 30 working farms, but pretty much everybody else goes outside of Easton to work, to do their shopping, to go to the medical facilities in St. Vincent's and in Bridgeport. And so we use the regional services, especially when there's a power outage or a fire or something like that. If we could spread, it's like horizontal tax reform. If we could spread horizontally a bigger tax base or a bigger revenue source that's going into regional services, we could save towns money, and we could really operate as the community we already are, that's living and working out into the region.
Okay, Mr. Dunsby.
So I favor voluntary regionalization and voluntary sharing of services. I do not favor mandatory sharing of services or the state telling you what you have to combine. If the town of Weston wants to have their own school system, I think they should be able to do so. I don't think they should be forced to combine their school with something else. You know, we hear lots of times people will get up and say, well, you know, the state has financial trouble and we can't afford to do what we're doing, so, well, you guys, you towns, you just have to regionalize and share services. But what you never see is you never see a plan. You never see an analysis. You never see a study that say, if you regionalize, you know, this, and this, then you're going to save that much money. It's always tossed out there as if it's as this kind of airy-fairy idea, but it's never given any analysis behind it. And the reason, I think, is, well, two. One is, I think most of the time the things people are thinking about actually don't work and would not generate any savings. And two, I think people just fundamentally don't understand how regionalized our towns are already. I mean, mayors, first selectmen, townspeople, they're always looking for ways to save money. In Easton and Reading share a high school. It was done voluntarily. Easton and Reading share a lot of the school administration. It was done voluntarily. Pretty much every town in the state of Connecticut, there's a worker that gets their workers' compensation insurance and their liability auto and proper insurance from KERMA, which is a municipal consortium. Many towns now, such as Easton, are going on to the state health insurance plan. We're allowed to access that, so we're joining the state pool. That's a form of regionalization. We all belong to a COG, a Council of Governments, which has a staff of planners and people to write grants that can be used regionally. We already do that. We have mutual aid, so if there's a big event in Easton, for instance, a big fire or something, we're going to get aid from the surrounding towns. And I'm stopped.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any rebuttal on that?
Well, I think the airy fairies working in the Council of Government might find offense at that, but the mutual aid is an important memorandum of understanding that we already have, and I think that we could strengthen that by having a pool of revenue that is shared with new businesses, by those towns in the region. I think that would be a real boon to the effectiveness and the cost of administrating if we could increase the revenue pool to the region.
Okay, Mr. Dunsby, anything further?
Well, one thing we should be concerned about, so Easton, Reading, and Weston are generally small towns. So we have the COGS, the Council of Governments, which I support. As I mentioned, they do a lot of good services. I mean, there has been some talk about raising taxes and giving a portion of that to the COG. Now, I don't support raising any taxes, but one thing that's also been proposed is giving the bigger cities or the population centers within the COGs more control. So we want to be very careful of going down the path of raising taxes, giving that to a COG, and then subsequent legislation being enacted, which basically says that certain members of the COG are more equal, the cities, for instance, because they have more people, and then they would get the money. I mean, you could see that happening, and that's something to be on guard against.
Okay, next question is going to go to Mr. Dunsby first. Given our relative population stability, Connecticut may lose one U.S. representative after the 2020 census. Redistricting is now a legislative prerogative. Should the state law be changed?
So I don't know the exact details of the state law, but it would seem like redistricting would be should be the responsibility of the legislature. So I would leave with them. I believe that's how it works in pretty much every state. You need some decision mechanism to make decisions like that. The legislature is the voice of the people. We're all elected every 2 years, and that some body has to decide on what the district border should be. It seems like the legislature should be the body to do that.
Okay, Ms. Hughes?
We got to get some of those people back. We need all of our representatives in Congress, now more than ever. I would defer to the legislature, and I hope to be one of those people making the argument to sustain our full voice in Congress. And that's why I'm running for the state legislature, because I think the best antidote to what's happening on the national level is on the state and local level. And I think we have a determination and an urgency and a renewed engagement that will help protect against some of the damage on the federal level.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Dunsby? No. Okay, anything further, Ms. Hughes? No. Next question goes to Ms. Hughes first. As you know, Connecticut has a citizens election program that funds candidates for state races. Should the citizens election program be sustained in its current form or changed, and if changed, in what way?
We are very fortunate in Connecticut to have the citizens election program, because it means that anyone could run regardless of socioeconomic status or first-time candidates like me, and raise a lot of small donations from the constituency that you hope to serve and qualify for a state-funded grant to run your campaign, so that you're not spending the whole campaign really sucking up to big donors or corporate donors. You have to only accept small campaign contributions, and there's a limit on that, and then you can qualify for the state election grant. It's always under assault, and this is really important because most states don't have this, and that means that most people only can run if they can raise a tremendous amount of money. And that really puts them at risk of corruption, as we well know. So I would say that this last legislature voted to increase the small donations to $250. I think it has more integrity to keep it at $100 and really encourage the candidates to go out and seek more support from small donors to run to be their representative. It's called the Clean Elections Program. I think that we're very fortunate to have it. That's why myself and so many other first-time candidates, especially women candidates, mothers, people with jobs and families can actually find themselves running, is because of the Citizens Election Program. We need to strengthen it, protect it, and it's always under assault by the Republicans.
Mr. Dunsby.
So, not every problem has a good solution, and I think I would put campaign financing in that category. Because on one hand, you certainly don't want the case that people who are very wealthy can just get themselves elected easily. But on the other hand, I think you have to recognize that you certainly don't want to also restrict people from using their resources to make their voice heard. So it's tough. I mean, on balance, I would probably not have the taxpayer-funded elections. I think it's the kind of thing, if the state were flush with money, it probably wouldn't be coming up. But on balance, I probably wouldn't have them. I mean, I think if you look at the issues, but look at where the state is today. I mean, we are facing huge, huge deficits. So do we want to use money to buy bumper stickers, to buy feather boas in my opponent's case? Or do we want to use that money to be for making more beds in group homes, which we know we have long lines for? It's a matter of priorities. And I think in general, we have more important priorities than using taxpayer money to fund elections. The state representatives, we get $33,000, and I participate because that's the system. I can say it shouldn't be the system, but I have to participate in the system that exists. We get $33,000. I think that's a lot of money. You could run a campaign on a lot less than that, and that money could be used for other purposes. I think what probably will happen going forward, we're probably going to see that, you'll see the Citizens Election Program be maintained, but I think there'll probably be less resources for it, in part just because there's less resources for everything. I mean, I think what you saw last legislative session, it got a little muddled. I think the idea was to increase what the maximum donation was, which used to be 100 for our races, now went to 250, and the amount coming from the state reduced. The state being what it is, the amount was not reduced, but the maximum donation went up anyway.
Okay, I'm afraid that's time. Any rebuttal or extension?
Yeah, the Citizens Election Program is funded solely through unclaimed assets that are left in the state. So, you know, when they're not claims, somebody dies or whatever, or leftover campaign funds. So they're not really coming out of the general fund, as my opponent intimates, you know. So it is money that is really about in this pot that is really about having clean elections. And I think that is so important for a very fragile democracy, that we not succumb to what we see in the aftermath of Citizens United and just the flood of dark money, corporate money into campaigns, and the corruption of our elected officials.
Anything further, Mr.?
So it's all taxpayer money. So whether it's an asset or the special transportation fund or the general fund is irrelevant. It's all taxpayer money. It can all be used for taxpayer purposes. I think the Citizens Election Program, I mean, it's certainly not been a solution to everything. We have seen lots of ways that it's been circumvented. I mean, there was a senator, not from here, but up the line, who, when they decided to run, had lots of friends and families give money to the political committees in that district, which could then spend the money. That was effectively a circumvention of the Citizens Election Program. When Governor Malloy ran one time, and he thought he might be running against someone who was going to be a self-funder, he basically had the legislature increase the amount of fund that was available to his reelection bid. So when a certain political party controls the statutes, there's ways around it, and that's happened.
I'm afraid that's time also. I will remind the audience to please keep commentary out until after the debate. Next question goes to Mr. Dunsby first. Why does Connecticut not have a more coordinated 911 system, and what should the legislature do to fix this?
I think I'm just more familiar with the towns that we have, and I think the dispatch system that we have works well. This is one of those issues that's sometimes raised along the lines of regionalization, and that it would save money, which I suspect it probably wouldn't save very much money. But I think if towns want to have their own individual dispatch centers, they should be allowed to. I mean, I can speak for the town of Easton. It's not just a dispatch center. In the town of Easton, that's the one that the police station and the dispatch window, that's the one place that you can go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there will be someone there to meet you face to face. I think a lot of towns around here are like that. If that were taken away, we wouldn't have that, and that little piece of community would be gone. So I think towns want to maintain that. They should be able to do so. If there's less funding from the state, then that may be the case, and that might be just a choice that the individual towns have to make. But I think the system we have, in that towns are allowed to make their own decisions, works well. I think it supports local control and how communities want to run themselves and what kind of communities they want to be. If other towns want to regionalize dispatch centers, and many have, then they should be free to do that as well. And perhaps there would be some financial incentive for doing that. But I think the notion that we're going to just have one dispatch center in the state, I think just misunderstands what these dispatch centers and the role they serve in small town, which is that they're much more than dispatch centers. They're also the public safety hub and the place if someone's driving around late at night and they think someone's following them, they can go to the center, they can go to the dispatch center and have someone meet them there. If without that, we risk having dark stations, and a community may choose to do that, but I think they can choose not to do that also.
All right, Ms. Hughes.
I support self-determination and the will of the people. If people want to consider, we have a coordinated access network, the CAN for homelessness. So there is a one central dispatch center to call to get on a wait list or find out what beds are open, and that makes a lot of sense. It's so that you're not calling around to all the different options in the area. But you know, public safety is an expression of the community that it resides in, that it's located in. But I do think that the people might decide that that is something that we can share in a very small geographic area, and I would support that. I think that we are looking for ways to modernize our communication systems, especially in the face of extreme weather scenarios, and I would love to see us invest in preparing that.
Anything further, Mr. Dunsby? Anything further?
No.
Ms. Hughes? Okay. All right. Given, and this is a question I was not sure I was going to ask, given the recent change in the United States Supreme Court, should the Connecticut legislature re-examine its abortion law? And this one goes to Ms. Hughes first.
Excellent. The question is, should the state legislature re-examine our abortion law?
Yes.
Well, we have already passed some state protections to encode our protections of women's reproductive rights and health care in state law so that it cannot be deteriorated from the Supreme Court. But that, you know, anything could happen, and I firmly support it is time to let women be in charge of their own bodies and their own health care with their own providers and have access to their own determination, just like communities have access to their own determination. So I think that we can always increase public education, we can always increase reproductive health education, and we can really protect access to an array of reproductive health options for women, regardless of party affiliation and socioeconomic status, and I think we should do that in Connecticut going forward.
Mr. Dunsby.
Well, I think as most people know, Connecticut has basically put Roe v. Wade as state statute, and I don't think that should be changed. And I don't think there's any. So I mean, I think we have what we need. We basically have the Roe versus Wade, and that's been made state statute. I guess you could fill with language, but it basically, I think that covers the major issue. And I would go further to say that I've never heard anybody say, I mean, I'm a Republican, I spend time with, in Republican caucuses. I've never heard anyone say, any Republican say that needs to be changed. I don't think there's any will or any interest at all at changing the state law which protects women's reproductive rights.
Okay, anything further, Ms. Hughes?
I haven't heard anyone say that should be changed, but I haven't heard enough of our leadership stand up for it, and that is what needs to change right now.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Dunsby?
Yeah, I'll do it right now. I thought that's just what I said. The law that we have, which protects, which encodes women's Roe effectively makes Roe versus Wade state law, should not be changed. If someone were to say we should change that and weaken it, I would attempt to stop them.
All right, thank you both. This is going to be the last question probably before the close. It's going to go to Mr. Dunsby first, and it's one of several that was asked about increasing civility in public life. What are the issues on which you would actually cross the aisle to vote with the other side? On what issues would you not?
Well, to the issue of civility, so I think people tend to pay more attention to national politics than they do to local or state politics. And I think people would be surprised just how civil the legislature is. If you watch Channel 59 sometime, instead of watching the channels up in the 60s and 70s, I think you'd be very pleasantly surprised how civil it is. And in the committee level too. I mean, everyone was, irrespective of party, everyone is very civil. The House debates are run in a very, very civil manner, very orderly. People listen. People sometimes change their votes based on what they hear. And I think, frankly, that's something we should all be very, very proud of. I mean, for instance, in my experience, I worked 2 years on a Freedom of Information Act bill. I worked with the Freedom of Information Commission. It passed the GAE committee unanimously, it passed the House chamber unanimously, and passed the Senate unanimously. I didn't get the sense that anyone was saying, well, you know, Dunsby is a Republican, let's give him a hard time. People looked at the substance of the bill, and if they thought it was good, in which case they did, they supported it. In just the same way, I've never heard any Republican say, well, you know, so-and-so is a Democrat, so we're gonna, you know, make them suffer a little bit if they get this through. That kind of thing just doesn't happen. So I think on most bills, and frankly most bills, most legislation end up being bipartisan. And that would be my standard, is what's the substance. And I'm not sure this is exactly what the question was going at, but to the issue of where there's a difference of opinion. On social issues, there's not really much difference of opinion between the Republicans and Democrats, I haven't found. Most of that stuff passes overwhelmingly. There is a big divide on tax policy and fiscal issues. And I would state that given where Connecticut is today and given the issues facing us, it's the fiscal issues that we need to be focusing on. So I would be a little more rigid in my views there because I think I know what the path is we need to take.
Okay, Ms. Hughes.
Well, you voted against net neutrality, and one of your signature bills is this increasing cost of Freedom of Information Act requests and giving authority for vexatious requests to be dismissed. And that troubles me because it puts a price on information. And as public servants, you, the public, have the right to the information you need about what we're doing, what we're not doing, where we stand on things, and we have a responsibility to address those concerns. I will never dismiss your legitimate concern as illegitimate. I will never ignore or condescend to that. And I think information is important and is your right. And that is one issue that I disagree with my opponent on, and I would vote differently. And I want to usher in a new era of accountability on all levels, and that is why I'm running.
Rebuttal, Mr. Dunsby?
So, well, if Anna voted no, she would have been the only one in the entire legislature to have voted against it. It didn't increase costs. Now we're a little off the subject, but since it's been raised. I mean, the public's access to information. I mean, Freedom of Information Act basically does two things. It says basically anyone can attend a public meeting, and it basically says a member of the public has a right to any record. And those are critical rights for our state and for our democracy. The issue was becoming that in some towns, not even necessarily around here, but lots of people I talk to, There are people who basically abuse that right, so they would file request after request after request for the same information. And there's a legal process. You then go to Hartford, and you can potentially be fined. So the issue was that there was this, not a big, but a small group of people who might file, 150 requests in a single year to get the same information. And that was just the balance that we needed to restore. It doesn't prevent anyone from getting information. It just gives someone the opportunity basically to go to the state and say, listen, this guy's giving me a really hard time. Can you please take a look at it?
Okay, I'm afraid that's time. Any rebuttal or anything further, Ms.?
I just have a hard time believing in this era that is the most important issue of Easton, Weston, and Reading, and that is the most urgent thing. But I don't dispute that there's probably repeated information requests being made for the same thing, but I still believe in your right to know.
All right. At this point, I'm going to ask the timers to reset the watch for 2 minutes. We now go to closing statements, and by the luck of the way it's come up, Ms. Hughes gets the first close, Mr. Dunsby gets the second.
So don't just vote for me because I have the prettiest sign. Right here, right now, let's begin a new era of accountability and public engagement on all levels. We the people includes all of us. I aim to represent everyone, no matter your race, your cultural background, your socioeconomic status, past and present, your gender, your party, or your affiliation. Even if you can't vote, you're not old enough to vote, or can't wait to vote for your very first time, I can't wait to represent all of us. I will work my hardest to represent, communicate, and engage with you as the sole elected public office that I will hold. I commit to addressing your concerns, investing in the modern economy, modernizing our transportation infrastructure that is holding us back, passing earned family medical leave and child leave, strengthening new businesses and diversifying our regional tax base, better support for seniors to age well in their communities, right here, and portable access to affordable health care as a public option for all workforce, and student loan relief and strengthening the public education and students we have already invested in. I know we can do this. We can be the Margaret Mead expression of the country. Never doubt that a few people can make a difference indeed. Nothing else really has. And we are a small state. We are a small but mighty district in 135. We can be leaders in showing the way of this new era. I'm running because we can't afford the status quo, and I want to thank you all for showing up and showing your determination and engagement in this process. I'll see you at the polls. I'll be wearing bright blue.
Thank you. Mr. Dunsby.
So I got my start in public service in 2002 when I was appointed to the Easton Conservation Commission. And back then, there was a lot that was going on. I would leave my job in New York City a couple times a month, come back, review Inland Wetlands Commission and wetlands applications. That went late into the evening. I spent a lot of weekends out walking in the development sites to pace off the corner of a proposed foundation to a wetland. There was a lot going on back then. Connecticut was thriving. Believe it or not, and it's shocking to say, the state of Connecticut's economy is about the same size today as it was in 2002. We're actually the same size we were in 2004. Basically, 13 years with no economic growth. That's the fundamental problem Connecticut is facing, is there's no economic growth. Since the recession ended in 2008, the rest of the country has boomed. We have continued to shrink. Why is that? I think we can point to why. Since we had tax increases in 2011. We had tax increases in 2015. What have the legislative Democrats and Governor Malloy proposed? What's the status quo proposing? More taxes. Taxes on cell phones, statewide property tax, increase the sales tax, tolls, all sorts of taxes. Whatever you think state government should do, whether it should do a lot or a little, it can't do anything without a foundation of prosperity. And it's that foundation of prosperity that is slipping away and is what we need to be focused on now. We need to balance the budget without raising taxes so companies and workers take us seriously. We need to eventually, once we do that, start cutting taxes, especially the income tax, because that's the tax on work. It's those tax increases which has driven away the economic activity. Getting Connecticut fiscally sound, turning it into a vibrant place so we have the money to provide for those who need and for our children to come, that's what I'm going to be fighting for, and I hope for your support on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you both. On behalf of the League, I would like to thank the audience for the questions we asked and for the equally good questions that we never got to. I would also like to remind you, you here are going to be at the polls November 6th. Please get your friends to vote.
Let's thank Jean for a wonderful job moderating.